Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and a question I seem to get asked from time to time. Someone asked me again in one of the video comments, and I kind of laughed about it, and I said, let's go ahead and answer this for people, because it creates some confusion, and it's an old coach trick or guru trick, and a lot of people aren't aware of how it actually works. Hold on, let me get a sip of my coffee. Still on my first cup here, so bear with me. And I've had someone say, hey, my weight loss had stalled in my prep, and it had been stalled for like 3 weeks, and it wouldn't go down. The scale wouldn't go down. And I knew I was in a calorie deficit. I was on relatively low carbs, doing a fair amount of cardio. My coach had me reduce my cardio and increase my carbs. He had me add about 25, 30 grams of carbs back in every day, and then the scale started dropping again. I lost 2 pounds the next week after going 3 weeks without losing anything, but I had increased my total calories. He had me just add carbs in on top of what I was already eating. And I don't understand, was this correcting some sort of metabolic damage? And as you guys know, metabolic damage, I don't believe in it. The evidence is pretty overwhelming that other than small adaptations, which I've covered in detail for you guys, it's not really real. So what's going on here? Well, first of all, what you have to look at is anytime you reduce carbohydrates, you obviously lose water weight for a short period of time. And then once your body stabilizes to the amount of muscle glycogen you're going to hold, or even when you're in a calorie deficit, because calorie deficits usually require you to lower carbs and you're still in a deficit, your body has got somewhat depleted glycogen storage, you lose water weight. Once it reaches a homeostasis, you stop losing water weight, and since you're in a deficit, you go back to just losing pure tissue weight. And the water weight doesn't fluctuate very much in terms of what you lose as a result of the reduced carbs and reduced calories. However, what happens is that as carbs go lower, particularly when you're training, cortisol can go up. So as carbs go down for a while, cortisol starts to go up. If you increase carbs, cortisol can go down. And training produces cortisol. And you're doing large amounts of training, particularly when you're pushing your limits, you can produce more cortisol, and the cortisol can result in weight gain. And I know that from myself. Even when I train, I only lift 3 days a week, but if I have a particularly hard training session, even if I'm in a calorie deficit, the scale will be up slightly the next day. Even though I didn't eat any additional calories, I can be in a deficit, and sometimes I'll gain weight after that training session, and then it'll drop back down. So for me, with my training, my scale weight does this. I'm always heavier the next morning after a training session than I am the next morning after a day off. So I'm particularly sensitive to this, more sensitive than most people. And what happens is that coaches do this is for one of two reasons. They do it either to impress people that they're some sort of amazing guru, and it impresses their clients that they can have them eat more carbs and more calories and reduce activity and lose weight suddenly when they had stopped losing weight. So they have some magical trick. They're a master of understanding metabolism and speeding metabolism back up. So it can be a mystical trick that they pull. And a lot of them do this. A lot of even famous coaches do this, and they convince you this because they understand how the body responds in metabolic adaptation, which isn't true. Or they do it specifically because they've got a client who is panicking and nagging them because their body is holding water weight from the extra cortisol, who is losing fat just fine. In fact, cortisol itself can stimulate the release of fatty acids. But because that person has stalled and they're panicking and they're mentally hanging up about it, they'll go ahead and do that trick in order to have them drop the water weight, rather than focus more on more rapid fat loss in spite of what's on the scale. And it's purely for their own mental benefit. They've actually hurt your fat loss for the week because you've burned less calories and you've eaten more calories. So if you've done that, then obviously you're not losing fat as quickly. But it gets them through that mental hang-up because it drops the water weight. Because when you reduce physical activity for a few days, if you've been training really hard, your cortisol levels can start to come back down a little bit. And the same thing with the carb intake. You've increased the carb intake slightly, increased calories slightly. Cortisol, the stress hormones, can come down just slightly. And those two things combined together can drop them down enough that you'll go ahead and drop the extra water weight that you're holding as a result of the elevated cortisol and stress hormones. And swoosh, the scale goes down. Well, the scale goes down and the people are convinced, oh, I'm losing fat. But in actuality, you may have lost fat slightly slower that week. Because before you were losing fat just fine, you were holding extra water from the stress hormones. And in fact, the argument can be made that holding slightly more water weight can be beneficial when you're actually trying to lose fat. Not when you're trying to look your best, but when you're trying to lose fat. Because if you're carrying an extra 5 pounds of water weight walking around, that's an extra 5 pounds of body weight that you have to burn the calories to move around all day. So it will give you slightly better caloric burn. So in actuality, they've made you drop water weight, they've increased calories and carbs, reduced activity. So you got 3 different mechanisms by which calories in, calories out are going the other direction. So it's not ideal for fat loss, but it will get someone through that mental hang up. So for those who don't understand how that works and who think there's some magical trick there, it's not a magic trick. It's purely about regulating stress hormones, making the body drop water. So hopefully that clarifies that. All right, guys, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.